Welcome, everyone, to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Cheng, and joining me is my co host, Rudy Tamarchio. Happy Friday, Rudio. We have made it to the end of the week. I missed you, man. How you been?
Been good. We made it to the end of the week, but we still have a long way to go because with that college game day, 10:30 p.m. kickoff, I'm not looking forward to it. I have a Celsius waiting in the fridge for emergencies.
Listen, I got my pre workout ready to go. I'm going to pound that thing around 8 o'clock and be up till 5 in the morning, ready to do whatever I need to do in the gym once this game's over. But listen, we had a freaky Friday last week, and let's get right into it. Let's talk about the fail Mary really quick of what happened last week with and VaTech. What were your thoughts on that final catch?
I'm on the backside of the play, so I can't exactly see, where the ball is, but all I see are arms fighting for a loose ball. We hear people yelling, touchdown, touchdown. And let's just get this out of the way right now. At no point anywhere in that video is there a catch. So the only thought was when the ACC refs signaled touchdown, uh, my guess is they just want it to go to replay. But at the same time, it's the end of the game. So whatever you're ruling, it's probably going to go to replay anyway. It's not like the rule exists anymore. We need a scoring play to go to replay. So the whole thing was just a cluster. And, yeah, the right call finally came through, but it just drives me nuts to hear the rationale that's behind it because you don't know what's going on under that hood. He's looking at the play, but the referee, I think most people don't realize this, but the guy with the white hat isn't the one that's making the call at the end of the day. He's under the hood. He's
Right.
got his little earplugs in. He's listening to a guy in Charlotte, the league office, who they have like a command center set up. It kind of looks like the White House Situation Room with all these TVs watching all the games. It's Friday, so it's just Miami. So
Yeah.
all 300 TVs are on Miami and they're looking at this too and they're watching everything that's going on. So uh, when they say things like, oh, well, it took so long to overturn it, so it's probably just stand. I'm sorry, Chris, I'm going on a rant here because I need to get this out,
Get
but
it out, bud. This is therapy. We need this.
I'm just so tired of people with confirmation bias trying to say something where like it's college football common sense and then all of a sudden they want to make a point so they just completely turn it the other way around to try to make their, so everyone else tries to agree with them. Let's just explain this to the casual fan. When you're
Yeah. I
watching a play that goes to replay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, when we were both obviously in the stadium watching the game, and to me, it just didn't feel like a catch. And when you have that many bodies in an area and they're grouped that closely, and the object that they're trying to catch is so small in comparison to the mass of people that are there, I feel like it's impossible. And I think for a touchdown, for you to call a touchdown, which a lot of people have been talking about, for you to call it a touchdown, I think you have to see it as a ref. And when people have slowed down and looked at the video over and over again, people have kind of seen that it was hard for any ref in any position to see. And you can see when they get back together and they start talking, like, did you see it? I'm not, there was confusion even in between the refs themselves. And so to me, I think the right call was made. I think a lot of people who are, level minded can say that the right call was made. It was not supposed to be a touchdown. They needed to reverse it. I think where people are getting hung up on it is the semantics of it all. So if you're going to call it a touchdown, okay, now it's a touchdown. Now we need indisputable evidence to reverse it, which there really technically wasn't. But to go back to the first point, there really was never evidence for there to be a touchdown in the first place. So to me, I just felt like the right call was made. Like you said, that's 7 minutes. I mean, everyone's talking about it. That's a Canes fan, and if you weren't in the building at the time, I mean, that place was dead quiet. I mean, it
Yeah.
was, you could hear a pin drop. No one moved. Like, even after they signaled, touchdown, and the VaTech players are like running up and down the field doing the celly to make fun of Cam Ward. I mean, no one moved. I mean,
No.
I didn't see a single person wearing orange and green move an inch. And then that's when I think we all kind of knew, like, no, this. I think this is going to get turned around. To your point, where you said if it takes long enough, it's most likely going to be reversed. And so I just thought to myself, I was like, there's no way. I mean, especially after last year, which, by the way, new rule to admin, like, no more playing tech teams on a weekday. Like, that is strictly forbidden from now on, because two things happen. One, we don't play our best games when we play tech teams on a weekday. And then two, we get the craziest refs. I mean, after that Georgia Tech fumble, that wasn't a fumble last year. Now we've got a touchdown. I mean, I'm not trying to go for the hat trick of craziness during the week for next year. So please, let's not talk about what happened. Let's not talk about scheduling a tech team on during the week. But we did, Rudy, actually have a game going on during the night of Friday. What did you think of the actual game? What was something that like kind of stuck out to you, or what did you get from this game?
So no tech teams on a Friday also as your
No.
ACC opener, because that was the other thing. Miami was 4-0 before
Oh
they went into
yes,
Georgia Tech, so
that
the
was the third half.
whole theme was crazy.
Yeah,
Yes, the as crazy as this last call was, that was finally, correct. The whole game was crazy. The whole game was crazy because, we were talking about this a little bit in terms of momentum, but like the number of things that could have gone wrong for Miami that they also were ultimately able to overcome by just, going back to their basics and also just kind of taking a collective sigh. This is another one of those games where we talk about like USF. If this is Miami teams of, the past 15 years, they don't win this game because they don't crawl out of the mistakes that they made. I mean, Cam Ward turned the ball over 3 times. And
yeah,
granted, the first fumble that resulted in a Virginia Tech touchdown, Miami goes right down the field, scores again. They get a turnover of their own. They go up 14-7 before they call this phantom holding call that didn't exist on Markel Bell. That's 21-7. Miami is running and the blowout is on. So all of a sudden that gets overturned because of some, flop by a defensive end. And the very next play, Cam Ward throws an interception that gets run, really, really far back and goes for a Virginia Tech score. So it's just one of those things where it was a crazy game to begin with. Miami obviously wasn't at its best offensively and defensively, had to go work through a lot of injuries. Jaden Davis is the one guy you don't want to have injured because you already have Damari Brown out for a long time. And now you have two, younger players playing that other safety spot next to Mish Powell. And you had a whole bunch of things that went wrong that you weren't expecting to have wrong for Miami. Like they're getting run on from sideline to sideline because they can't set the edge. A couple guys are freelancing, so they're not in a position to make the tackle. They're missing tackles, 20 missed tackles over the course of the game. It was just one of those
yeah.
things where everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and Miami still had enough to pull it out.
Yeah, for me, I agree with you. I think this was a very, very off game. Like you said, there were 21 missed tackles. Just to give you an idea, 22 missed tackles all season. So we almost met all of our missed tackles in just one game. I thought it was a very momentum driven game. There were big swings of momentum carried in this game. As the Canes came out with a fumble, which you're thinking, okay, we stubbed our toe, but then they come on their opening drive, and then they come back with a statement drive next, and it just seemed like they had it under control until that second quarter interception gave Virginia Tech the keys for the next two quarters. I mean, they looked like they were going to be taking the game outright between the second quarter and the first maybe two-thirds of this of the third quarter. I agree with you. The D line was not a factor at all in the first half. It felt like on top of the missed turnovers, missed tackles. I think there were also some costly turnovers that led to about 17 points, if I'm right, in the first half. I mean, if we didn't turn the ball over in the first half, we're still in the game. We're still winning. It's a 21-7 game. I thought the offense also was very inconsistent. I mean, 29 yards only in the second quarter. That's that's very unlike UM this season. The running game, we also have to mention, very, very non-existent, was just absent. I mean, where were they? 32 yards. I mean, that is horrendous for Miami. I mean, we're not only known for airing the ball, we do know how to ground and pound. And so I thought that was a little odd that we weren't running the ball, specifically to the outside. I found when we were running the ball, it was always to the inside and to almost our detriment. You know, we constantly were getting stuffed. The O line was not getting a push whatsoever. There were just things that just seemed very uncharacteristic of UM. And like you were mentioning with the defense, there was a lot of busted coverage. Mish Powell looked a little lost at times, but I think that's also like you were mentioning because of the injuries that we saw on the defense. And it also looked like, I'm not sure if you noticed this in the game, Rudy, but a lot of players seem to be getting tired. They seemed out of like sorts. Did you notice that as well at all?
Yeah, the thing about the game and how it was played, I think a lot of it was just the momentum of how like Miami was. They didn't look desperate at any point in time, but they were forcing things. And part of that offensive struggle in the second quarter that I noticed was you saw a lot of deep shots on first down by Cam Ward because they're trying to keep Virginia Tech's defense honest. The one thing that, the place that Virginia Tech lines up really well against Miami is they have large lines. They know how to play well at the line of scrimmage in terms of defensive line. Offensive line can be very physical. And also their cornerbacks, their DBs, they're tall, they're physical.
Yeah,
So
that's
they
true.
played a lot of press coverage and they kept a lot of guys in the box. So one, they're using the same formula that Cam Ward and Miami have been able to dissect over the course of the season of throwing their way out of these situations to try to open up the field more. But what they were doing a good job was sitting in all of these routes that were, 1 yard, 2 yards, the short, quick hits that were trying to counter pressure. They did a good job of sitting on those. So Miami wasn't able to really get separation. So a lot of that offensive, struggle in the second quarter was just them not being able to get downfield. I'm thinking, okay, we'll run a screen, maybe go for an intermediate passing game or something. You're right about the running game in terms of using more speed. I think we saw more success in the third and fourth quarter when they brought in Chris Johnson and they brought in Jordan Lyle, and they
Yeah.
were running more outside the tackles versus running inside the guards, which is what they were
Yeah.
trying to do most of the
Yeah, and it was one of the
time.
things I was telling my friend when we were watching the game was I was like, I really hope our defense can kind of pick up and make adjustments a little bit quicker. But they were doing this pitch play and the motion pitch play all the first half. And I'm just wondering, I'm like, why are we not making these adjustments to where we're locking down the ends? I mean, I understand Bain has been out and Tyler Barron, I mean, while he played a decent game, I would say a good game at best, he wasn't that presence that we've been seeing these first 4 games, and so
He was a little
I was
hurt.
wondering. What?
He was a little hurt. I know I saw him a
Yeah,
couple times.
yeah, I mean, I just remember hands on hips. I just remember seeing, like, guys, like, you could just tell they were a little worn. I think the ACC play was kinda catching up. I think, obviously, Virginia Tech had an answer for almost everything we were doing. There wasn't much that it almost felt like they knew our plays. I know that sounds weird and in the Connor Stallions era, we can't put it past it, but I obviously don't think they stole our signs, but it just seemed like they always had an answer for almost all of our offenses. But the game wasn't all bad because to me, one of the things that I did love about this game was the resilience of the team. Because I think in years past, Miami would have given this game up. I think, especially in that last drive, which I really kind of want to get into because I really want to bring this home for people. In any other year going into this game, one again, our heads would be inflated. It's a weekday game, so we're probably going to get a shortened week. And then on top of that, we're playing a team that we are quote unquote supposed to beat. So we're going to have the game we had, but we would have lost it in years past. This year, I thought what was really interesting is I kind of want to look at this last drive, this final drive. So the final drive starts with under 8 minutes left. Okay. Let's look at this drive really quick. I want to bring this back to the very beginning. Um, it starts off with Cam Ward getting sacked immediately. That's the last way you want to begin any drive, right? And then as the next play we get look at this play. He runs. Look at Damian Martinez. He's getting this chunky yards. But guess what? It's the Miami special. It's holding. We get driven back again. Now, again, in years past, this would have stifled it. Again, the Miami special holding. Then the next play, we get a 4-3 and this miraculous catch by X. Xavier Restrepo, I don't know how he made this catch, but it's ridiculous. Like, to me, I just felt like the football gods were on our side. Then we get a fumble, and then Damian Martinez somehow gets 5 yards out of that, which to me, again, it would never have happened. And then we have a 3rd and 3. We have to convert, and we get a great catch. You know what I mean? And then there's the play. Let me watch this. This has got to be play of the year with Ward shuffle passing it.
Yeah,
I
Riley
mean,
Williams, the tight end. Yeah.
this play, it literally shifted the momentum of everything. I mean, the stadium, I think it was this play or it was the block field goal that we had where I literally lost consciousness. I was cheering and screaming so loud. I literally, my vision was blurred. And then finally the toss to Horton, which, funny story, when you really are paying attention to this drive, which I think is interesting, it's like Horton caused the hold at the very beginning, and then he gets the score, the go ahead score. And so I thought that, it's poetic, it's perfect, and I just thought it was a great drive for UM.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great thing to take into this week. A lot of people are wondering, which we'll talk about at the end of the show, about going into Cal, like how is Miami going to respond? I think we already got a taste of that with that final drive, which is why I wanted to highlight it, because I think in years past that drive would never have existed. Especially, like I said, with all the things going into it, whether it was the sack right off the back, the holding call by Horton, the floor catch by Restrepo, like those things wouldn't have happened. By the way, 4th and 3. It's really important to
Yeah.
remember that. So I just thought that all those things that occurred on that final drive are evidence for how we should be going into this weekend against Cal.
It shows that they're still really well prepared. It's something that they, even though there's adversity, even though there's pressure on them, one thing that they always do is they communicate really well with each other, because that one play that Cam Ward has with sorry, my I hear like an echo in my own voice because of my little clearing of the throat. Um, that play with Riley Williams where he, ducks, evades pressure twice, shakes off a tackler and passes the ball out. That's something that they go over all the time in practice in terms of, look, your
Oh,
assignment is to block initially because we're running max protect, but as soon as you see me like moving around, just get open because I'm going to
yeah,
find a way to get the ball to you. We're much better as an offensive team if we're getting the ball out of my hands instead of me trying to run for my life. He'll do it when he needs to. If there's nobody open and he sees a hole and he could run as he's done before, and he'll continue to do all season. But everything there on that drive had a little bit of moxie from having everybody on the same page chemistry wise, and
yep,
then also some great play calls and some great execution. So, like that touchdown with Isaiah Horton, that's a similar riff to what they ran with Brashard Smith when he was here last year against Texas A&M. It was the
yeah,
other side of the field. It was the
mhm,
short side of the field where they're having a more as like a running back coming out. In this case, it's a great way to, one, it shows what the coverage is for Virginia Tech. Are they running man? Are they running zone? Two, it's just taking advantage of great timing. And as soon as that defensive back who's on Horton turns his back and thinks, oh, he's going across the formation, automatic score. You already know
yeah,
that one's going in because he's uncovered. So masterful drive all the way around. Miami probably throws a pick years ago
yeah,
running that
absolutely,
piece. The one thing I remember from like 20 years is that every time we need a drive to win at the end, whether we come through or not, there's usually like one ball batted down at the line of scrimmage. And with a guy like
yes,
Cam Ward, who's extremely tall and stands strong in the pocket and has great protection, you're not going to see that this
yeah.
year very much.
Yeah,
So
his eyes are always downfield. He's never really worried about the pressure, and sometimes to his detriment, because there was one play where he got nailed from the backside, and I was
yeah.
genuinely worried. I was like, "Man, that was a rough hit." And I was like, and I think that's the tackle that is replacing Jalen, right? That's
Markel Bell, the same guy they
yeah.
called the phantom holding call in the first half. And it's one of those where, like, don't get me wrong, he's done really well in relief, but I can
No,
only
yeah.
imagine the officiating in that game was absolutely terrible. Let's get that out of the way because
Come on,
Miami
bro.
was
It's
good enough to
ACC
overcome it.
it's
Right.
ACC officiating. Are we expecting anything less?
Right, but outside of the holding call, which wasn't, that's gonna get in a guy's head because all you think of is, "Okay, I'm
Yeah,
using
that's
technique and
true.
I'm blocking the way I'm taught. What else are they gonna call on me at some point in time?" So you're not gonna be as effective when now they're sending multiple guys from your direction. But let's not forget, there was a missed field goal attempt from Virginia Tech where they had 2 number 17s on the field. Should have
Oh, yes, I
never been
remember
done.
that.
Right.
Yes.
There's that, and Virginia Tech helped Miami out a hell of a lot because we talked about that second quarter where Miami is struggling to move the ball. So what do common sense wise? They don't kick the ball off after a score. They squib it because there's like
Yeah.
less than a minute to go or 2 minutes to go in the first half. They squib it. Chris Johnson almost houses the kickoff, and that gets us
Shoelaces.
in field goal range.
He got caught by his shoelaces, and he could tell
Right.
too. If you go back and you watch it, he's like, "Man," he was like, "If had I just like that, if my left foot wasn't down, he would have never got me. I would have taken it to the house." Again, woulda, coulda, shoulda. There's a lot of things. I think on both sides, by the way. I think the coaching on Virginia Tech Fry is he's lucky that the Fail Mary occurred because I think had it not occurred, I think he would be getting reamed this week for a
The
lot of
loss
his
is 100%
his
on him.
time management skills on their final drive. That horrible call to go for that trickeration kick. It's like, yo, your kicker's literally kicked from 56 yards or 58 yards, whatever it's
Yeah.
been. This guy is
Yeah.
automatic. Like, just get the guaranteed points and move on. You know what I mean? But now
Yeah.
all offseason, we have, and even into this season, actually, surprisingly, because you don't usually get this kind of news going into the season, surprisingly, but conference realignment has been looming all over college football. And finally, it looks like someone is stepping up to the plate and suggesting a solution. A group of prominent business leaders, athletic directors, and school presidents announced a proposal for a new college football super league, dubbed the College Student Football League. The proposal would reorganize the 136 FBS schools into two conferences. The Power 12 conference would be comprised of 72 schools drawn from the current Power 5 conferences, while the Group of 8 conference would be feature 64 schools from the current Group of 5 conferences. Now, the Group of 8 schools would have the chance to earn promotion into their Power 12 conference after a given season, but Power 12 schools would not face relegation. The Power 12 conference would be split into 12 divisions and feature a geographical and results based scheduling model to foster more competitive matchups while still preserving certain long standing rivalries, even between teams in different divisions. The season would conclude with a 2014 playoff. Additionally, the CSFL, as it's being called, would collectively bargain via a single comprehensive players association, with the CST's proposal suggests could lobby in tandem with the league for a special classification from Congress, enabling athletes to seek collective representation without being deemed employees. Now, Rudy, is this the football fix we need, or is this some posturing by some powerful people?
I think it's a mixture of things. It's one of those where, in theory, it sounds great, but you're not going to get everybody to fall in love with it. Also, they need somebody branding wise stat because the name sucks. I'll just put it this way: the model sounds pretty good, but the name is awful.
I have to be
So
honest with you. I sent it to you the wrong way, and I kept thinking of it as the college football super league. So I had the
yeah,
same letters, just my dyslexia was like kicking in, and I was just
yeah.
shifting the letters around. So you're right. The branding is atrocious. It's terrible.
But let's do some math. So you're saying 72 schools in the top division, 12 divisions. So that's like six
Here,
teams a
let's look at it.
division.
I actually have a full screen. Let's look at it real quick. Go ahead.
So let's do some math. We're looking at 72 schools, 12 divisions. That's like six teams a division. So at least you have a
Yep.
good block of your schedule that's taken care of. I'm really hopeful though that they don't try to do like what the NFL does where teams in the same division play each other twice. I don't want that in college sports because
Yeah.
there's something about playing that one team once a year. If you don't get it, okay, well, out for revenge next year. We circle the date on the calendar. The thing I'm wondering though is where are the existing conferences in this model and how much do they have a buy-in? Because the SEC and the Big Ten have done a great job of posturing themselves to be really the two decision makers in all of college football. And
Yep.
if something doesn't work for them, it's probably not going to get off the board because I could see like other programs, like a Miami, for example, or a Clemson, or Florida State, that might like this. I just don't see it where certain schools that have conference alignments, it's going to be really interesting to see the schools have the power. We talked about this in previous episodes. The schools are the ones that give the conference the authority to work on their behalf. And yeah, the grant of rights is kind of a deal that I think commonly people think that it has programs more trapped. I'm really interested, and I'm going to have my popcorn out to see if any schools are going to go against their conferences and wonder what they're going to do. I think this model gives a really happy medium for both, where conferences in football, because remember this is only for football.
Right.
Basketball isn't affected, baseball
Right.
isn't affected, nobody else is affected. I think these larger conferences still have a lot of say, even in the football side of things. They will probably want to buy in and have their involvement in terms of logistics with officiating and working with those divisions. So you could say that the ACC might be able to work with two or three divisions out of that, 16, or the SEC might have a couple divisions. The Big Ten have a couple divisions. They'll work on the naming. They'll figure out some
Right.
like really funny conference affiliated nomenclature. Like remember when there was the leaders and the legends for
Yes,
the
in the
Big
Big
Ten? That
Ten. Yeah,
stupidity that came through.
that was
Yeah,
ridiculous.
they'll find a way to make something work. They can call Miami like, the something Atlantic, and they can do the something coastal again. So the circle of suck coastal division may actually exist again. We'll see.
Well, looking at the way they divide it up, I want you to like I'm gonna read off. So they have all these things in 12 different divisions, right? And then
Mhm.
look at the Southeast Division right here. You have Florida, Florida State, Georgia, and Miami. You have four powerhouse schools all in the same division. Now, I understand Florida and Florida State are having an off year this year, and so it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, like looking at it right now in this moment in time, this snapshot. But I mean, if you were to do this 3, 4, 5 years ago, and then let's just say we can kind of recreate that a year or two from now. I don't know with Florida and Florida State, with the state of those programs, if they'll be back to
Yeah.
competitive nature in that time period. But let's just say miraculously Billy and Mike can get their stuff together. That's that's to me, that's worse than the SEC West was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the SEC West, you maybe had 2 or 3 max teams that were really good. So you had your Alabama, your LSUs, and then maybe Auburn in the occasional year, maybe Texas A&M in the occasional year, but that was really it. It was Alabama and LSU's division. When you
Yep.
look at this, I mean, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, and Miami, I mean, that is just to me, it's almost criminal to put all of 4 of those teams together. I think the idea itself is brilliant because for the pure fact that I think this is where it's going. Um,
Yeah.
Given a massive act of charity from the Big 12 and SEC, which I don't think they're going to do, and give up money so that the ACC and the Big 12 can stay alive, all these conferences are going to cannibalize each other.
Yeah.
We know it's going to go to a super league. The fact that we're just still fighting this idea is ridiculous to me. It's like, let's just rip the band-aid off and get to it so that we can have a secure future. Because as we get into the next story, I think issues like this and like our next story are really challenging the foundation of why we love this sport. So to me, I love college football, and I've always loved college football because of the regionality, the pageantry, and the tradition, right? Those are just things you don't get in the NFL, i.e., the NFC East, I think is what it is, where you have Philadelphia, New York,
Yeah.
and then Dallas. It's like that's not regional at all.
Yeah. Philadelphia,
Um,
New York, Washington.
Washington, yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's that. What kind of I don't even what kind of division is
Dallas.
that? But what's special about college football is that there is a regionality, there's a history, and you have these rivalries that are generations long, where great grandpappies, played for a school, and now their great great grandsons are now playing, and I love that. I think that's part of the beauty of the tradition of college football. And I was watching another show, and they were talking about FSU, and they were talking about the culture of FSU right now, where kids are more
What
about get
culture?
yeah, that's true. Great point. But that it's a toxic culture of clout and wanting to be in front of the cameras, because they were highlighting about how Mike Norvell was, doing these sprinting exercises, and as soon as the cameras turned on, these FSU, players became, cheetahs, and you should be playing for the spear. You should be playing for the U on your head, and so when you have this disruption where we could see teams like Iowa, I mean, I hate to say this, and people watching this probably like, who cares about Iowa State? But teams like Iowa State or even Baylor or Kansas State or Oklahoma State go away. These Big 12 schools, or even in the sense, I mean, and we know Boston College has never been a powerhouse, but let's face it, if we go to a super league, Boston College is not surviving. Like I'd love to, I wish they would. Wake Forest, the same thing, but like I said, going into this next story, there are certain things that are challenging the foundation of college football, and I think we need to get ahead of it before we literally eat ourselves alive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, let's go back real quick to that previous like division with Florida State, Florida, Georgia, Miami. I think everyone's happy with that except for Florida, because that was the whole reason why Florida wanted to get away from Miami, was to
Right.
say that things were going to be harder and they don't want to have that competition every single year. But I think in terms of tradition in college football, yeah, it's preserving the regionality, but it's also the sport is not as efficient as the NFL. The NFL is automatic. It's one of those things where
Yes.
offenses are really, really good. They hum. You have players that are in your system sometimes for upwards of a decade.
Hmm.
Granted, the average NFL lifespan is only a few years, but you have, in theory, the ability to keep your pieces together for a long time. Whereas in college, it's really a revolving door every 4 years. And what I find super interesting about college football is you can name some major programs around the country, and regardless of who's the coach or who's the quarterback or who the running back is, that team, that school, that program has an identity that's kind of been with it, that spans all of those different years, all those decades of family and other players coming through. Like if you think of Nebraska, you don't think of a team that throws the ball over the place. And don't get me wrong, Dylan Raiola's there and they're doing a little bit better this year, but really you think of that same hard-nosed running style of football. If you look at guys who come from Nebraska, it's all linemen already to begin with. So
Yep.
that stuff still exists. Miami's always been kind of an air show once Howard Schnellenberger came in and really established a football culture in South Florida, understanding that our best talent goes all over the country. The All Stars that go to Alabama and that go to Texas and that go to Oregon, they're all from here. So the
Right.
Miami program has that same DNA. It's a fast, aggressive defense. Doesn't matter if it's Jimmy Johnson or if it's Mario Cristobal. Now, same thing with Michigan and USC. That's where there's a joy to that, but at the same time, yeah, I don't like that there's so much outside business money,
Yeah.
private equity investment coming in,
I agree.
because all they're doing is, yeah, it works for the major programs, but it doesn't work for everybody. And you're going to eventually see, like you were mentioning earlier, I think you're going to lose a lot of pageantry out of it. You're going to lose a lot of the uncertainty that makes this product so unique from the NFL. You
Exactly.
have fans that move cities and they're super loyal to the Washington Commanders or to the Philadelphia Eagles, but when you go to an NFL game, it's more homogenous.
Hmm.
Like yeah,
It's like
the fans have their
sterilized.
chance. Yes,
It's
it's
a very
super
sterilized
sterile.
game. It's very sterile, yeah.
And you don't really see much of a difference. Like you go to an Eagles game, you go to a Cowboys game, you go to a Dolphins game, like it's an NFL game. Like you kind of know what you're going to get. Whereas in
Yeah,
college, your whole world gets turned upside down because the stadiums are all different and the facilities are all different. The fans
yeah.
are all different. Everything is, there is a level of professionalism that's needed in college sports in terms of how you treat your players, how you treat your students, how
Of
you
course,
treat your
I agree.
fans. But
100%.
it's not supposed to be the same experience. That's
Right, and
just
I think also that what differentiates it too from the NFL is, for the most part, I mean, this isn't a blanket statement, but I can for the story, the NFL people are going to be giving. You're going to get their best game. Every
yeah,
team is going to be giving their best effort, and not to say that college students don't, but let's use for example. In this past week against Virginia Tech, I mean, you can have it a really massive off week, and a team can gain momentum and beat a ranked team that you would never
yeah,
think, and so rarely do we see, the Kansas City Chiefs going down, but there is that occasional game. But like that happens, I think, far more often in college sports than it does in the NFL.
one hundred percent.
There's a bit of a almost uncertainty in college, which makes it really like what I think is exciting. I think that's the great
Yeah,
thing. It's truly a any given Saturday sport where anything can happen, and literally one player missing can shift the tide, i.e. FSU,
yeah.
of an entire team's season and postseason. So
It's
I
exciting,
think
but it's frustrating as hell too at the same
I
time.
think I think this college, yeah, I think this college student football league, which again, yeah, now that I'm saying it again more, it's horrible. It needs to be rebranded. I think it
Yeah,
needs to be tweaked. I do like the idea of having certain teams together, because like as much as I do hate that Southeast Division, let me tell you something. The ratings for college football, UM playing Georgia every year, Georgia playing FSU every year. I mean, and I say not UM, Georgia playing FSU, because those two tend to recruit against each other a lot. I
yeah.
mean, even though they're in separate states, they do have a regionality between. So I thought that would be kind of cool. But I do think it's something that needs to be fixed. I think we're just one step closer to
The
getting
only
there.
thing Right. The one thing that's good though is with 12 divisions, 2014 playoff, you have the opportunity for wild card. So if you're looking at that division and two teams look like, they're beating the brakes off of the other two and, are looking well for the rest of their schedule, there's no reason that you could say that division doesn't get a wild card. So whoever
Right.
wins the division gets in and then there's a wild card that comes through on that. So I
Absolutely.
get that, but at the same time it's just like the thing that yes, it's super exciting, but it's also really frustrating about college football is there's still 18 to 20 something year old kids, with the exception of Cam McCormick, who is a 47-year-old man. But other
Yeah, he's
than
got his
other than
AARP card
that,
already.
their football IQ is still not what you are in the NFL. You're still not seeing
Exactly.
as many defenses, as many offenses. It's something that what I find so funny is that now that we're almost approaching 40, so we're almost quite there at Cam McCormick age, we've seen everything that there is to see. So we're going,
Yeah.
why are we still getting beat by the wheel route in this year? Because it's different players.
That's true. Actually, I love that you put that. That's something I'm gonna have to remind myself of constantly,
Yeah,
because you're right. It is new players, but that's again, that's the beauty. You see,
that's the beauty
watching
of
the
it.
growth, watching the development of each player's year in and year out. I think that's something that I'm excited for, and I hope that we can again save this sport, because I think we're at a precipice right now. And as we go into this next story of the landscape of college football possibly changing, and that starts with UNLV QB Matt Sluka announcing that last week he's activating his redshirt status and leaving the Rebels of Las Vegas after a dispute over NIL money. This would mark the first time a player voluntarily left a team specifically relating to NIL. The Rebels are currently 4-0 now and are considered a group of five favorite. Now, what I thought was interesting about last week's decision by Matt Sluka is we weren't sure what happened. And I'm glad we're covering it this week, because I'm now wondering, with the results of the Fresno State game, do you think UNLV let him go because they knew what they had in his backup, Rudy?
Uh, it possibly might be a little bit of that, but to be honest with you, I think it's a majority of just damage control because I don't think a coaching staff looks good keeping a player on roster on scholarship and saying, "No, I'm sorry, you're our player. You're going to be here. I don't care what happened deal wise." Because to be honest, looking at the situation, it reminds me a lot of Jaden Rashada from
Yeah.
UF. And this is something that we're, as you mentioned, we're going to be seeing a lot of because there is no real regulation behind NIL, and like different schools, different relationships with their collectives and their coaching staffs. And just hearing the details come out about saying, well, the players have representation now. He has an NFL agent that's helping him at
Yep.
NIL. It's actually a former NFL player. I think his name is Marcus Cromartie.
Marcus Carney.
And
Yep.
yeah, so you're seeing something here that I don't like the criticism that Matt Sluka is getting, because as much as people are
I
saying,
don't
well,
either.
he let down his team, he's doing it for the money. These are kids who have to look out for their best future. If you're
Yep.
promised a scholarship to go somewhere, if you're promised a certain amount of money to study at a school, and all of a sudden they tell you, oh, I'm really sorry, there's no money there, you're transferring and going to a different school regardless, whether you're playing sports or you're just academically, there.
Yep.
So the
And
the
even
issue of, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say even for let's be real. Like everyone's who's probably watching this is like, why do we care about UNLV? Well, it's not the UNLV or the Matt Sluka, because let's face it, like the reason why I really don't blame Matt Sluka either is like it wasn't like this guy was gonna go to the NFL. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So he this guy's got to cash out as much as he can before his last year, and I think he only has one more year of eligibility left.
Which is the
So
urgency behind him doing it. Yes.
exactly. So that's why I don't blame this guy, because I mean, it's not he knows he's not going to the NFL. So he's like, let me make my money now while I can, set myself up and get the best deal that I possibly can. I want everyone to see who maybe is not so familiar with this. These are the statements from each side of the party. So basically, just to kind of give you a quick summary, Matt's basically saying that he was owed $100,000. He had spoken to, I believe it was the offensive coordinator, who had
Mhm.
promised that he would get $100,000. Now, the problem with this was a verbal agreement, which Marcus Cromartie, I hope you're learning from this. Get it in writing, pal, because I don't know anywhere on earth that still honors a verbal agreement. You need that. And listen, being married to a lawyer myself, we don't do anything without anything being written. Even with our HOA, someone just ran over our lawn yesterday, and I was like, "Nope, that's not me. Gonna get that in writing. Make sure they know I did not do that." You know. So to me, I thought that was a little weird. But then you get the university's response, which is basically saying and insinuates to a certain extent that Matt was kind of, blackmailing the school and telling them, "Hey, this is a pay for play kind of thing," and they that I think UNLV was kind of like, hey, we're not trying to get into any violation territory here. We just kind of want to say, nay, we're not going to follow that, which I thought was interesting too, because covering it a week later now, we learned that there were actually some prominent boosters and business owners in the Vegas area who were willing to compensate Matt Sluka, even though the university maybe didn't want to, or their collective didn't want to. There were outside entities that were willing to come in and give the money, and they said, "No, we're done. Like this guy's gone. He's not a part of our team." And vice versa, same thing for Matt. Had said the same thing. He had said, I'm not a part of that team anymore. But it raised an eyebrow to me when I noticed how well UNLV was playing against Fresno State as I was watching that game. And it made me actually wonder, does this hurt Matt's case that UNLV did as well as they did?
I don't think so. I mean, I
No?
think it's something, no, I don't think it hurts him, because as much as it's having a system and it's being, he was recruited. He was playing at Holy Cross, and the coaches said, according to, everything that's being alleged, that they want, if he transferred there, he earned their starting job. There's a reason why they wanted him there. They're running a specific system. Yeah, he doesn't throw the ball a whole lot. He's a running quarterback. He's really effective at it. That all makes sense. I don't think it hurts his stock. I just think I think it's a black cloud over college football in terms of
Yeah.
there is this fight. It's not just UNLV. I'll just put it out there and not say, it's not a whole bunch of shame on the athletic administration. They're trying to
Right.
cover themselves. They're playing, as
Exactly.
all of us in the business world call it, CYA. They're
Yeah.
trying to cover themselves to, not get in any trouble, because the biggest thing with this issue that was brought to light is it is a violation for coaches to use NIL money as a recruiting tool in for a commitment, whether you're
Right.
transferring or whether you're a high school student that's coming out. That's the same thing that's alleged in the Jaden Rashada allegations with the University of Florida. And also a very similar situation when it comes to boosters being available, wanting to contribute to NIL, and the school is
That's a
turning
great
them
point.
away. So this is
That's a
the
great
big
point.
problem that we're seeing right now, where regulation needs to be happened. There
Yeah.
are independent NIL collectives. Some have excellent relationships with their schools, like Kane's connection, for example, the University of Miami, and there are some that don't have great relationships. And there's this fight over the same amount of dollars between development programs of athletic departments that are saying, well, we want a new football operations center. I'm using Miami as an example in terms of they're raising all this money and now they have this
Well,
project
Miami, I
on
think, is also a
hold.
great example of how an NIL collective needs to work. So
Yes.
continue. I think this is a good example of what you're about to
Right.
go into.
So development, departments in athletics are looking to try to upgrade their facilities. And we want to have an operations center. We're expanding our practice facility. We want better locker rooms for the different teams. And it's not just for football, because with this money, with this success, we'll be able to
Right.
use X, Y, and Z of
All
it for
athletes.
naming rights here, but also for other sports. But then there's also the ability to, or the necessity to win right away. And by doing that, it's by bringing in your best talent. So the NIL collectives are saying, well, we're going to help you with a deal to help you out to bring in better talent. So if you win right away, you'll then have more engaged donors to help you with the long-term projects. It's a matter of what comes first. And before the age of NIL, facilities, facilities, facilities was always the mantra for everybody to attract better talent. And now that they've even the playing field with NIL, because we all know some schools down south were doing this already. There is no
Oh
reason why,
yeah.
every player
Bama.
has a Dodge Charger for
Yeah.
the longest time. You go
What
through
university was that?
Tuscaloosa.
Was that UF? There was a
Um,
university where one of the players had gone out to like the player parking lot and taken a picture of the player park, and it literally was all Dodge Chargers, like 20 or 30 of them. Like it was the
yep,
funniest thing, which wonder where you're getting that money from.
exactly. So that's where I see this going. And that's where there needs to be some sort of, with this whole Super League, I'm not calling it college student, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
They're adding in collective bargaining, which is great. The only thing I'm worried about is with players going in and out, who is the representation, and are they actually going to have the players and the students' interests in mind? They need somebody like uh, let me think of like De'Aaron King, or somebody like who's the analyst now that's on Fox? Robert Griffin III, RG3.
Yes,
Those are
RG3,
guys
yeah.
who would be great because they understand collective student interests and needs. So as long as they don't become like you don't end up like an NFL commissioner where it's like, oh, we're just going to do whatever the schools want us to do. That's the big thing to worry about. And because these kids are 18 to 21, 22 years old, at the majority of them,
Yeah.
they don't have that same, foresight into what their needs are going to be and how to get together. That's,
And when
yeah.
And when you're looking at it too, you also have to remember the NFL, you could be in the league. I mean, if barring, I mean, running backs aside, but you can be in the league 10, 12 years. So you have some continuity there, where now in the NIL era and the transfer portal era, these kids are only going to be out of school or in school for maybe 2 years, 3 years max now. It used to be 3, 4 years. Now we're cutting that down to 2 or 3 years.
Yep.
And so it's like, how do you even get a bargaining agreement as a collective of students, you know? And my biggest worry about this, and why I wanted to cover this story, is because I truly believe this actually, even though Matt Sluka, he's some random guy from Las Vegas and played at Holy Cross and no one cares, and he's probably going to fall into oblivion and no one's going to remember his name, but his actions will be remembered, because I have a feeling this is going to send a ripple effect. Back in 2016, Christian McCaffrey and Rudy, who was the other player? It was a
Oh,
running back.
that's what's his name from LSU. That was Leonard Fournette.
Leonard Fournette, yes. So Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey in 2016 were super, super badass running backs. Like these guys, I mean, and they obviously did well in the NFL as well. Made a name for themselves. They were drafted, but they chose to do something that is now a normalcy, which is they chose to sit out in a bowl game. And now pre 2016, bowl games were everything. Bowl games, I mean, even like the Sun Bowl, like people enjoyed going to bowl games. Kids loved playing. It was actually a second chance for a lot of players, seniors in particular, to kind of build up their resume tape. And in 2016, we saw Christian McCaffrey sit out. And now we're seeing a lot of players, sometimes a whole team, i.e., FSU last year, sit out a bowl, and not only a BS bowl, like, I'm sorry, the Sun Bowl, but the Orange Bowl, like one
Yeah.
of the biggest premier bowls there is, sitting out. And so you're seeing like the USC D tackle Bear Alexander, which is a slightly different situation, doing the same, activating his red shirt and deciding to enter the transfer portal, or insinuating that he will enter the transfer portal. I'm wondering how many players are going to actually see this and go, you know what? he did it, I should do it because like you had alluded to earlier, this isn't only at UNLV.
No, the way I look at these kind of situations is it's very important for coaches now more than ever to be honest with their players and
Hmm.
set expectations. And yeah, I think in the recruiting process, as players go into the portal, they're going to learn. Nick Saban said this and said, not all the guys in the portal, they're there for a reason. The majority of them, and it's either
Yeah.
they couldn't find playing time, they weren't exactly
Yeah.
the top
Dabo.
member, right? But also some of
Dabo said
them
that. Yeah.
were truly done wrong by their programs too, in terms of being promised playing time or promised NIL benefits. So I think it's one thing for players to have their best interests in mind in terms of if you were guaranteed something, and if you can honestly look at that and say, well, ability wise, I was actually starting material. There's just some sort of issue with the coach that I can't find the field. Okay, then that's probably a great option for you to go. But I don't the thing that I'm seeing that's a little weird about this is you're not going to see as many programs be as successful as Florida State was last year by just turning over their entire roster. That's more of an anomaly. So I think in
It
terms of
is.
having players do that, yeah, you might get a better opportunity somewhere else to be that one, centerpiece kind of guy. So for a guy like Bear who's going out of USC, he may not transfer over into another major program if he's not like that one dude that's going to be the one that everyone's looking for. But if he can make his film look a little bit better, that's going to help him out in terms of getting to the next level if that's what he wants to do,
And,
or if he
and
has a better NIL, deal coming out of it. So
And I'm all for player rights. I want these kids to get paid. I think they should. It's $1 billion industry. They're the ones who are putting their bodies on the line. They should be compensated. I 100% agree with that. But I also like the reason why I mentioned the Bear Alexander thing is because, you know, his situation in particular is unique. But let's just use the Bama and Georgia where they're stacked, right? And let's say you're a 5-star and you came out and you go to Georgia, you go to Bama in years past. You don't want to sit. You want to be
yeah,
on the field because you know how good you are. And so I think these players should be able to transfer. I think they should be compensated for if it again, just because you're the number two. Because like let's say we get some sort of oversight or we get some sort of rules on NIL, something tells me there's going to be tiers. So like, starters will get paid a certain amount, second stringers will get paid a certain amount, and third stringers will get paid a certain amount. Well, let's just say you're a second stringer but you could go play first string at another university, at a competitive university, and make that
hmm
university more competitive. You should be able to transfer. You should be able to call that red shirt out and say, "Hey, listen, I came to Bama, came to Georgia. I thought I could fight for a spot. I ended up becoming, the second stringer. But I know if I go to UM or I go to Florida State or I go to Florida, I can start there and then make that money. I do not blame players at all for taking that road.
yeah.
So we're just gonna have to wait and see. But speaking of Bama, oh, go ahead,
Well,
Rudy.
there's one real important point though that I realized. Like
Oh,
as soon as
absolutely.
there's one thing about NIL and about this ability to transfer that I think gets lost, and it's something that the world before NIL. What's really great about this is that when kids used to sign their scholarships, they send in the letters of intent. What people, I think most people don't realize is that that's a 1 year renewable agreement. That's not
That's
something that
true.
you say you're going to commit to 4 years. That's
Yeah,
the
that's
norm
true.
because
So
there
true.
were rules
I
behind it.
forgot about
But
that.
schools like Alabama, Georgia, like a lot of the SEC, they're treating that depth, that talent pool as, look, if you don't pan out for us, there are no busts at these programs. You can't afford to have a bust.
No,
If you don't cut it, we're cutting your scholarship. Go transfer out. You're sitting out a year and good luck somewhere else. And back then, they make you go to a FCS school like a Jacksonville State or something
yeah,
like
for a
that.
year.
And or it's one of those where good luck if that doesn't end up working out for you. So this helps it gives students the ability to keep themselves in the spotlight by actually fighting for a position, regardless of whether they were first string talent or not. I mean, if you look at a transfer that may or may not be working out right now, if you look at Georgia, wide receiver Colby Young, who was at Miami,
Yeah,
stud for Miami in terms of their targets, but there were certain things that fans started to notice in terms of route running and other pieces. And look, it went to bite them over at against Kentucky this past week.
it did, and sometimes it's like the grass is not always greener because maybe he could have
Yes.
stayed here an extra year and had Cam Ward. But speaking of Georgia and Bama, we had some conference collisions this weekend. We saw some shootouts. We saw some sneaky upsets. Rudy, did you get a chance to see that Ole Miss Kentucky game?
I watched a whole lot of that. That was something where that was one thing I think by the time like I woke up and kind of gained sanity, that's the first game that I started paying attention to
Yeah.
because at the beginning, it looked like, oh, Ole Miss is going to be pretty good with this. And
Yeah.
one thing I noticed is that Jackson Dart did not have himself a great game. And Kentucky, look, people want to say what they want about Kentucky, and they're 2-2, and that they had some chances against Georgia and gave them a run for their money. Mark Stoops coaches that team. And I have a special place for Mark Stoops in terms of his
Yeah.
coaching ability because he was a defensive backs coach at Miami back in 2001, 2002. That guy knows how to coach. He knows how to coach defenses and they know how to play physical. And honestly, he's done great for Kentucky, where it was always a basketball school first. So for them to even be in contention, well done by them. And it doesn't come as a surprise.
Yeah, Kentucky beating old number 6 Ole Miss 20-17 for those of you who didn't get to catch it. I thought this was like you were mentioning, speaking of Mark Stoops, this was his best win, hands down.
Mhm.
I don't think Mark Stoops has ever beaten a number 6 team with Kentucky. I thought it was super important and a major win for him considering the offseason debacle he had with Texas A&M. I think a lot of people are forgetting that,
Yeah.
where Texas A&M was like, "Hey, you're our new coach." Psych, just kidding. You are
Michael.
definitely not. And he had to walk back to Kentucky with his tail between his legs and say, "Hey guys, I'm still your coach. Like, I'm here." And he's really rallied this Kentucky team this year. Took Georgia to the wire, beat Ole Miss. I mean, Kentucky is just I don't think they're one of those teams you can sleep on. They're not the Kentucky they were 20, 30 years ago where you would look at them like a Vanderbilt and you're like, "Oh, it's an easy dub." They
And
they
yeah,
they are a team that is a viable team. And if you go in there and you're sleepwalking or you're slow stepping, they're gonna hit you in the mouth. Because, like you said, Mark Stoops is a great coach for what he has, for the talent pool that he has in that locker room. I think he makes a lot out of nothing. I'm not saying Kentucky's a horrible team and they've got a bunch of, benchers, but they're not working with what Ole Miss has and what Lane Kiffin has. And I think Lane Kiffin, again, missed another moment. This is another missed moment by Lane Kiffin. He lost to Arkansas, Mississippi State back in 2022, lost to Auburn in 2021, all teams that he probably and should have easily beat. I think Kentucky is learning from its mistakes with Georgia in that game when they went for it on fourth. I think even Mark Stoops alluded to that in the press conference where he was like, I think we're going to go for it. I think we needed to go for it, and they did, and that I think is the drive that led to them winning the game. What I thought was really interesting and has kind of been, I want to get into this next week when we do our midseason report, but the stats for both teams and QBs almost had the exact same stats, like key stats. Penalties for Ole Miss, 8 for 53. Time of possession was 39 minutes and 43 seconds to 20 minutes and 17 seconds. And then Ole Miss was 1 for 10 on third down conversions. Like, you're never going to win a game like that.
no.
I mean,
And
they were I think they were just outplayed, they were outcoached, and sadly, this is a thing that Ole Miss does year in and year out under Lane Kiffin, which I think all these people at Florida who want Lane Kiffin, I'm like, you might want to pump the brakes. I think he tends to play down to his competition.
they lost that game as soon as I saw the end zone said the sip in it. And he's wearing the shirt that says the sip. And I'm
That's their
like,
new
look,
branding initiative, the SIP. You got
I
to come to the SIP.
come on, man.
But it's
Like
the most Lane Kiffin thing, Rudy. Like, come on. Like you read that and you're like, if that's not
it's
Lane, I don't know what else is.
it's one thing to have it be Lane's thing. It's another thing to make it your entire identity.
Yeah.
Like when Miami kids start wearing the tie with Al Golden, like if that's his thing and he wants to do it, that's great. But let's not brand the entire university off of that. And same thing with like Colorado, like Deion Sanders done a lot of great stuff there. He's Coach Prime. He's looking like Father Prime now with that gray beard and his
Oh
eight
yeah.
toes.
But he looks
But
good like
like
that. I like him with the
right.
gray beard.
Colorado's Colorado. Ole Miss is Ole Miss. The SIP is just trying too hard. Like, come to the FAU was really, really funny because it's, group of five, small school. The SIP is just like, dude, no one from Mississippi calls it the SIP. I'm sorry. They
No.
don't. You're trying too hard. So as soon as you put that in your end zones, you're not taking this game seriously. Get back to winning in between the end zones, in between the hashes,
Yeah.
and
Because you got the
the rest
talent.
will take care of
That's the
itself.
thing. You've spent almost as much as Miami and NIL, and you've got talent there. And what does everyone say about Lane Kiffin? He just doesn't have the guys. Well, this year, I mean, he pretty much bought his team and got a ton of talent in the transfer portal. So it's like Is it the team or is it Lane? I don't know, and time will tell. We're gonna have to see how the rest of the season goes. I think the game against South Carolina this week is going to tell us a lot going in
Yeah,
there because it's Cocktober. But I don't know why they call it that. Speaking of branding, but they
because
got
they're
that.
great.
I know. Let me tell you something. They do not miss a beat. They're like, hey,
Nope.
but on to to me, what was the second most exciting game of the week, because obviously took the most exciting game, was that UGA Bama game, the number 2 versus number 4 with Bama beating UGA 41-34 at home. What did you think?
Not just beating them. So I'll preface this. I was at a wedding. I was getting the updates on my phone. I kept checking the score while this is
Can we
happening.
stop fall weddings too? To anyone
I
watching this
I
that's
can't stand it.
engaged or single, don't get
Don't
married
get me
in the
wrong. I
don't get married in the fall.
appreciated that they picked a date that didn't fall under a Miami game because I already told Jen. I already told my girlfriend, like, hey, I'm sorry if it's during a game and it's at home. Never mind home or away, but if it's at home, we paid a lot of money for our seats, and sorry.
Listen, I love my godson. He is the most precious little boy besides my boys. Poor thing, I missed his birthday this year. I missed his birthday this year and last year because of games. And I'm like, listen, guys, this is I get 6 weekends. I get
He
6
will
weekends
forgive
a
you.
year. He will. He's
He
not gonna
will
remember.
forgive you. He'll grow up and be like, you know what? I would have done the exact same thing.
And you know what I'm
But
gonna do when he's old enough to recognize? I'm gonna be like, listen, pal, do you want to party or do you want to go with Tio Chris to the game?
hey,
I
we're
bet you
getting
when he gets
into
to when he gets to those teenage years, he's definitely gonna be opting for going with Tio Chris to the football games.
absolutely. But back to Bama and Georgia. So
Georgia.
I'm watching the score and I'm seeing like 30-7. I'm going, oh my God, Bama is just running away with this. And then Georgia starts to come back. And the excitement of it, yeah, like Jalen Miller will look great, but Ryan Williams, again, how this dude, he's a 17-year-old that's already ready for the NFL. He just does
It's
superhuman things.
insanity. The kid, like, I just was he on was he on your radar at all before the season? I know Jeremiah Smith was definitely on our radar
Yeah.
because we lost him to Ohio State, but I just don't remember this kid being on my radar at all, and he is a stud.
Yeah.
Like, and by the way, it wasn't just the Georgia game. The Georgia game is just kind of like where the nation got to see him. But if you go back and you watch Alabama's games for the season, he's a stud. This guy is legit.
Yeah,
He's
he's their
playing on
difference
Sundays.
maker.
Yeah,
He's their difference
absolutely.
maker. And at the same time, I think you notice that Carson Beck's stock is starting to drop a little bit too. Because even though he helped lead
Yeah.
this comeback, and granted, they got all the way to the red zone and they threw that one fade that got intercepted that was targeted to Colby Young,
Yes.
who didn't use his body to block out the receiver, who was like a foot
Hmm.
shorter than him. Other than that, though, Carson Beck didn't really look that great in that game. And it made me think, you look back to last year and he had a couple of guys like Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers. And I know Kirk Herbstreit's been saying it every single time he covers a Georgia game. Who's going to be the guy that steps up for him this year? Is it going to be another tight end? He underthrew a lot of those catches. So his receivers were smart enough to come back to the ball, but it didn't seem like he knew where to go under pressure and that he just didn't have like that poise that you expect of a, leading quarterback to have. I'm trying to remember
I,
the
I
starting. Yeah.
I see him. I know this is going to sound a little sacrilege, but hear me out when I say this. I kind of see him almost as a Ken Dorsey, right? Good to average to good quarterback, decent quarterback, but he had playmakers next to him that really made him look exquisite. And I
The
think that's where he's at. I think he's a decent to good quarterback. I wouldn't put him as, Jalen Monroe, uh, Nico Malia. What's his name? Is it Nico
From
Maliava?
Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee. Yeah,
I'll
he's not
just
him. He's not Cam Ward. He's a good quarterback, and he had Bowers last year and Gonky. When you have players like that, like when you're throwing to Andre Johnson, you're gonna look like a stud. You know what
but
I mean?
I have to defend Ken Dorsey's honor here for a second
Fender,
because
go ahead.
as much as it is to have playmakers, it's something to know the offense and know where the ball needs to go. And he
100%.
always
Ken
delivered the
was
ball.
cerebral. Ken knew the game. He was cerebral. He was brilliant. I'll say that. But what I mean, the relation I mean is, it's like, is it really a stellar quarterback or is it the parts that are around him? And for Georgia, at least, and I just use it's not a complete connection, but I think for Georgia at least, it's definitely parts. I don't think he's panned out to be the quarterback that they really
Yeah,
wanted,
but
and
Dorsey
that
was
what they
the
need.
leader. Dorsey was the leader of that offense, and he put the ball exactly where he needed to go. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, it didn't always come out perfect spiral. Sometimes it was a little ducky, a little
Yeah.
quack quack, but that quacking ball was right where he needed to, right in the face mask, right up at the numbers where they can grab and
Right.
run with it. And
That is right.
he used to get into his players' faces on the sideline and say, "You have to catch that ball. I put that out there. That's one on one. What do you mean you're going to let this little guy out catch you for the ball, outrun you for the ball? Absolutely not. That's yours." So that's where I think the leadership aspect is different because don't get me wrong, there's something about having a personality for a player. And
I agree.
I had a feeling that Georgia was losing that game when I saw them get off the bus. And I saw Carson Beck in this outfit that tried to make himself look like The Rock with the mock turtleneck and the chain over the top of it. And I'm going, you don't got the frame for that, man.
Yeah.
Worry about the game. Don't try looking like Mr. GQ trying to go out there. You get GQ when you have W's. You don't
Yeah.
get GQ when you lose to Bama and you almost
And
lose to Kentucky.
this has been the problem. It was a tale of two halves for me. And it's been that way, I feel like, for Georgia all season, where there's like this first half slump and like snooze that they go through. And they just can't get their offense operating till after halftime. And it was a really slow start for Georgia. And then Bama, on the other hand, came out swinging with a 30-7 first half lead. I mean, Bama looked like they had something to prove. And I think a lot of the talk, I think a lot of those players who stayed after Nick left, and then even DeBoer himself probably, slight undertones, not full bulletin board material, but you know, a lot of people are counting you out. You're not the same team. You're not as good without Saban. You're not going to be as good. And I think they had something to prove, and they wanted something to prove. I mean, DeBoer, he called that first half perfect.
Yeah, it was
Fren
flawless.
chef's kiss. I mean, it was just I can't think. I mean, it got to a point to where I was watching the game, like, me and my friend I had my friend down in town, and we were excited to watch this game, and we got to, like, halfway through the second quarter, and we were like, "Let's just put on the Penn State Illinois game," which said no one ever. And
No.
then that game got so boring that I went back to the Georgia Alabama game, and then that game got interesting. And so to me, it was I think it was a little too much, too little, too late for Georgia. And while it was a phenomenal game, I thought the game was. I mean, that's why we watch college football, is for games like that. I thought it also kind of brought an idea to my head. So, like, with conference realignment constantly looming overhead and seeing the games over the past 2 weeks, it got me thinking we really could use an overhaul to the scheduling. The future of non-conference scheduling, I think, needs to be invigorated early in the season. Get these Georgia, Alabama games week one. Let's go. Do you remember that there was like a 3-year period where we would play FSU every Labor Day?
It was
Like,
also the worst 3-game stretch of exciting football. Granted, that first year, so when I first met you was the
mhm,
first time they played that season starting game. It was actually they rescheduled it because it was supposed to be like on a Friday or something like that,
right.
and they moved it to Monday because of the hurricane, all that stuff that was coming
Yep.
through. I mean, don't get me wrong, that game was exciting, but it was also what, like 16-10 was the final
Yeah.
score or something like
It
that.
was
We needed
6-10, yeah.
Yeah, we needed a screen pass in the final 30 seconds to get back on the board. It was one of those things where on paper, that was an excellent idea, but so early in the season without having like everybody on the same page and also learning, okay, maybe the handwriting was on the wall a bit for us in those years. I remember the first two were very low scoring because we won in '04, we lost in '05 off of a botched field goal attempt up in Tallahassee that was also like we were moving the ball offensively, but there was just pass interference call after pass interference call. So like we could have had great catches for touchdowns, but they just kept
Right.
pulling our guys down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a really cool time to do that. I think the
I
level of
don't think
college football is different now for sure.
yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be a rivalry week on week one, so you don't have to have an FSU UM. But I won't lie to you, as a college football fan, I was excited for week one, as
Of course.
opposed to most years. 8 out of 10 years, you're usually playing like a FAMU, a Bethune Cookman, a Ball State, a Middle Tennessee. You're playing these, Sister of a Worthless Miracle, School of the Blind, the first 2 weeks, and I feel like, yes, technically the sport probably needs it because it gets teams cohesive, it gets the rust off, people can start running and going as by the time they get to conference play. But I think if you introduce conference play early on, you can really bring in, because the stakes are immediate. We're not working towards the stakes. I mean, again, I just think we just need to get rid of these cupcake teams. It's not an accurate representation of teams because we get into this thing where we've talked about week in and week out. We'll get into it later, where you get into the rankings and you get these teams and you have, Ohio State playing Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall before playing Michigan State, who is rebuilding themselves, and now they look, oh, you're like you look at Ohio State and you're like, okay, like you didn't come out firing like you should against Michigan State. And I think if you had that Michigan State game, and let's just use week 4 or week 5, move it to week 1. You have Miami play Virginia Tech, and let's just keep it the way it was. They play that bad. Awesome. Because you know what people are going to do? People are like, wow, that game was exciting. Let me see what happens next week. Because they got to, people are like, the whole reason I feel, I mean, besides bad scheduling, obviously, which we're talking about, the whole reason why game day is going to Berkeley is to watch Miami fail. Like that is what ESPN is banking on. ESPN is banking on that Miami was exposed last week. Cal, who is technically a undefeated team in my book. I mean, you look at. I mean, we'll talk about the preview in a couple of minutes, but you look at Cal. They should have, on paper, they should have beat FSU. I mean, I'll get
Yeah.
into the stats, but like they should have beat FSU. So you should have an undefeated Cal playing an undefeated Miami. I mean, that would look better. But on top of that, I mean, the only reason why it's really there, it's the first time they're there, is because the media is hoping that Miami fails. I mean, another team that I want to highlight is Ole Miss. They lost this week, right? But everyone, Ole Miss, they're the dark horse in the SEC. They're right behind, Bama, Georgia, and Texas. Like they're right there. And no one was talking about Tennessee. Now Tennessee looks amazing, but they played Furman, Middle Tennessee, Georgia Southern before getting beat by Kentucky. I think when you can get into um, earlier conference play, the stakes get higher. And then what you can do, I think I had alluded to this in the first thing, is you can get into better interconference playing. What do you think? How would you fix this the scheduling model if you if
I
you
would
if you wanted to fix it?
Yeah, I would do it interconference instead of having a conference game to start. I mean, as funny as it was to watch Florida State lose to Georgia Tech week 1 in Ireland and make that, oh, look, they're bottom of the ACC because only 2 ACC teams played each other. That's one thing, but I think the fun piece that's happened in the last like decade and a half of college football is to have like those really compelling first game of the season matchups where like Miami and Florida, or they play in Atlanta and it's like, Alabama, has their ritual beatdown of somebody from the ACC, whether it's Clemson or it was Miami or if it was somebody else.
Yep.
I think more of that would be great across the board in college football, where you had like, if you wanted to have Washington go across the country and go play somebody, it's almost like an extension of bowl season by having it as the first week of the
Yes.
season. I think non-traditional cross conference matchups, or if this new model ends up going through a cross divisional matchup, would be really, really great. And then you could start conference play fairly early on,
Yeah,
is I
because
think the perfect formula for me.
I mean, 2 weeks ago, you had a great TCU versus SMU game. That was a great interconference game. I think if you had that on week 1, that's amazing. And then, like, another great example would be Nebraska versus Illinois on that Friday night game they had. That was early conference play. I mean, play. It looks good. I think people want to see close games. People want to see games that are back and forth. I mean, even like a Georgia Alabama game, right? Like, so many people were like, "Oh, I turned it off," and then like I got text messages from people like, "Are you watching this game?" And then they turned it back on. It's like, imagine having that week 3 then. So like you'd reserve the first 2 weeks to interconference play. So everyone and then you play like, so like an SEC team has to play a Big 12 team no matter what, because those are the two big boys. And then you have them play the little brother. So it's either a Big 12 or a ACC team. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Even though I don't think we're a little brother, but that's how they look at us, right? You
Well,
make
that conference, yeah. We're Miami, like it's one of those where it's so top heavy in terms of having two teams, but the organization and the prestige of the conference is a joke. So yeah.
Yeah. And so I think you can really bring people into this sport if you do that. Because again, when I tell people, "Hey, I'm going to the UM opener," and then they're like, "Oh, who are they playing?" I'm like, "FAMU." They're like, "Okay." You know what I mean? Like
With the band, no
the
band,
bait,
no
but
band.
that's
Oh,
the problem. They couldn't even bring the band because the band and the football team are beefing, and it's like, man, the whole team. The reason why we schedule you guys is for the band. You can't even bring the band. So it's like, jokes aside, I just think that you could really pull in a lot of eyes when you get these things. And especially, like I said, like I think the TCU SMU game that was a few weeks ago would be a great example. You put that bad boy in week 1. It's a Dallas metro area game. It's people want to see that. They love that.
Look,
but
I think the best early conference game was this past weekend was SMU just absolutely beating the brakes off of Florida State after all the drama from the offseason of saying things like, being
yeah.
alleged in a lawsuit of saying, oh, well, SMU doesn't belong here. They're a group of five. Oh, they're just letting them in because they're not going to get cut of the TV money first year. SMU, this is why you don't talk trash in the offseason
Yeah,
because
it's
they,
funny as
yeah,
as I was, like, looking 'cause I can't even watch FSU or Florida anymore. I mean, they're just such dumpster fires. I feel bad for them. It's like, you don't wanna watch your little brother get his ass
that's
kicked
my
all the time.
Kardashians.
Yeah, it's just I
That's my,
can't, like, it's so bad, but I'm looking at the SMU Florida State score, and I'm just thinking of that Michael Jordan meme where he's like, "I heard that, and I took that personally."
personally.
And it's like SMU put a hurting on FSU to the point to where I don't even think DJU is actually injured. I just think he's just so abysmal that out of respect, Mike was like, "I'm gonna bench you against your former team because it would just be the death of you if we put you on the field against Clemson and then they boat race us like SMU did." I
I
just
mean, they're gonna boat race them regardless. It's something that the best part too is the SMU band started playing like a sad version of the war
oh,
chant.
that was priceless. Yeah, you sent me
R-
that and it was that took me out and I was just like, this
Yeah,
these are dark days for the folks in Tallahassee. Well, last
yeah.
week's conference clashes gave us a new number one and a top 16 falling to an unranked opponent, sent them tumbling 6 spots. So, Rudy, our rankings are out. Bama is our new number one after beating UGA. Ole Miss plummeting to number 12, and Tennessee climbing to number 4, where I think they belong. Sadly, our Canes fell down 1 spot. Kind of feel like that was a little bit of an overreaction to Thursday. What do you think about the AP poll rankings?
Yeah, I think it was an overreaction, but at the same time, it's consistent with what they've been doing with everybody. So, like, if a team hasn't looked as good in a game, if they struggle, like for example, Oregon when they were struggling against Idaho and Boise State, they dropped a couple spots early on in the season. So, I think this is just similar to that. Same thing with Mizzou. Mizzou struggled with Vandy; they dropped a couple spots. Miami won a little bit more convincingly and came up. So, yeah, it was a slugfest for Miami. They won. They dropped down from 7 to 8, but look, the good news about these kind of rankings and with the way the college football playoff is set up right now, all they have to do is just keep winning out and win the conference. And they may not be ranked 1 through 4, but they're going to get one of those 4 automatic bids because of the conference affiliation. So I look at it as it's kind of like they're treating it as power rankings. For some teams, they understand. I'm fine with it. The way that it's playing out right now, there's still so much to learn. And look, we'll talk about it in the matchups, but 8 through 25, that's Miami included, all have some really compelling matchups this weekend. So we'll see how
Yeah.
this fluctuates.
Yeah, I thought Mizzou climbing back into the top 10 after free falling 4 spots was a little interesting. I was like, okay, maybe they're just trying to make that A&M game this week a little bit more tantalizing. Utah allowing numbers 10 through 17 to move up after their fall to 18. I thought that was, I mean, the Big 12 is just such a mess, I feel like, because it's like it's anyone's game and no one knows who's going to win. But I also feel bad because I do feel like there are some great ball teams there in a postseason playoff could compete, maybe not win, but definitely compete. So it's just interesting watching these polls because it's just like some people are dropping drastically, some people are only dropping one, even winning like us. It's very interesting to see where these pollsters are going. But 6 of the top 15 teams are actually hitting the road this weekend, including our Canes. What week 6 games are you keeping an eye on, Rudy?
I got a long list.
Go.
Uh,
Let's shoot it.
Missouri at Texas A&M is going to be a good
Same.
one.
I think so as
Michigan
well.
at Washington is going to be a great one. USC at Minnesota because that's cold. I
Ah,
think I think there's a difference with cold. Ole Miss at South Carolina, gonna be another good one.
yes.
See how they bounce
I
back because they
mentioned that
play
earlier.
well.
Yep, exactly.
Uh, Personally, I think Notre Dame struggles with Stanford. I think Stanford's going on the road, but I think Notre Dame struggles with them because that's a big physical
Ooh.
football team. And I think the score that Stanford had against Clemson is not indicative of what that game was. That game was close for about 3 quarters. So I think they struggle there because that's Northern Illinois 2.0. I think K State at Colorado is going to be really good, especially after
Oh,
what Colorado did to those 2017
that's
national
true.
champions, UCF, in their own house.
Yeah, and that's that Big
Um,
12. That Big 12. Remember the wheel of what was it called? The wheel of chaos that ESPN used to do. They just
yes,
need to rebrand that to the Big 12 because I feel like that's what the Big 12 is this year.
that's what it is. And then the last one is, another top 25 team, Clemson. I think they're going to try to go for 70 on Florida State because
Oof.
they're still mad about what happened in 2020 where Florida State opted out of playing them because of all the, COVID restrictions that were
Oh,
happening.
that's right.
The
Yes.
steam coming out of Dabo
I
Swinney's
forgot about
ears,
that.
and now that he has the team and the blood is in the water, they're going for broke. Like they may not Mike Norvell may not be on the hot seat for most people in Florida State, but I think he will be after this week if they end up running
Yeah,
up
if they
7.
get, I mean, my hope again, this is mainly because I just want going into the FSU game, I wanted to there to be excitement. I just don't want it to be like, death sentence for FSU and they walk into Hard Rock. But I hope FSU maybe gets something out of this redshirt freshman quarterback. I hope that they can at least put up a fight. I think even if they put up a fight and they lose, I think they're cooked. But if they get cooked and it's a boat race and they're just getting obliterated, I don't see them winning another game realistically.
No.
I mean, it's just I think the morale of the locker room will be just so abysmal. They won't be able to come back from it. I'm also looking forward to the Missouri Texas A&M game. I think it's really gonna even though it's not the two exciting teams. I think you have a Missouri offense who's kind of struggling. They're not the same high flying, high scoring team that they were last year, but they're still a decent team. I think Texas A&M has a thing to prove with Mike Elko. And also, I think this is kind of going to play out for the fourth spot in the SEC. I think Ole Miss, if they can pull out a win in South Carolina, they're still in the mix. I just think that loss to Kentucky really hurt them. And I think a Texas A&M team who only has a loss to Notre Dame, who's still rolling. I don't think Notre Dame's going to lose, by the way. But I love that pick. That's a sneaky, awesome pick.
I don't know if they're going
I
to lose, but they're going to struggle.
yeah. I think that loss will still look good. And again, if they win out, I mean, barring the Texas game for Texas A&M, I think they can look really good. And same thing with Missouri. I think Missouri, this is a battle for fourth place because we know neither of these two teams are going to compete like a Georgia or a Texas or even an Alabama. But I'm also looking forward to an ACC matchup, SMU versus Louisville, because I think this will be the battle for third place in the ACC, and it could have ramifications for the season overall moving forward. Right.
Yeah.
It's not so much about what's happening this week, but how teams choose to go forward after this week. If Louisville loses this week, how do they come into our game? SMU, same thing. If they lose, how do they pick up the pieces and continue moving on in the ACC? Another game I'm looking forward to is Rutgers versus Nebraska. I think Rutgers is undefeated.
They are.
Whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
So like, let's go, Shiano, the Fighting Shianos. And Nebraska's look. I mean, compared to last year and in the last 5 years, they look great. I mean, this Dylan Raiola kid is legit. I think Nebraska is going to be a contender for years to come. So it'll be interesting to see if Rutgers can remain unbeaten or if Nebraska can get this win. But speaking of undefeated, here is my sneaky game of the week. Indiana versus Northwestern. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, snooze fest. And I would not blame you for that. But listen to this. If Indiana wins, which they most likely will because Northwestern plays on a soccer field.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous though. It's right on the lake, but it's a soccer field nonetheless. So there won't be a home
Temporary.
field advantage. Yeah.
Temporary soccer field. Yeah.
But if they win, which I think they will, Indy will be 6-0 for the first time in over 57 years. Last
Wow.
time they were that 6-0, they won the Rose Bowl or they played in the Rose Bowl. So
Yeah.
it's like to me, it's like the Hoosiers. Like I'm like, wow, basketball school doing good at football. Who knew
Hey,
that
they
they
could
would
be the
be?
best team in Indiana.
I, they
They could
definitely
beat
are because
Notre Dame. They could beat Notre Dame out of it.
Purdue is hurting too, man. They just fired their offensive coordinator because they look terrible. But I mean,
Don't move the ball.
they they do not. So it's like, how crazy is that? That Indiana Notre Dame could be vying for the best team in Indiana. Who would ever have thought? Not me. But enough of the rest of the teams. Let's talk about the Cal UM matchup. What are you looking at as UM goes to Berkeley this weekend?
They have to fix their mistakes. We have to see how healthy they are defensively coming in. We already know that they're going to be out another defensive lineman. They get Ruben Bain back, but they also lose Elijah Alston, one of their defensive tackles.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
CJ Clark should have a bigger game for them moving forward in the inside the interior defensive line. The thing about this game that I like is that it poses a totally different style of football for Miami to deal with that they can probably overcome in terms of the injuries. Uh, Cal is not good at protecting their quarterback. As
Ooh,
much as
no.
the story is on, I forget his name right now, but I know he's from Miami, played at Columbus,
Yep.
knows Mario Cristobal and his family and Alex Mirabal really, really well. Um, they
6
can't
sacks
protect
in
their
the
quarterback.
last 3 games.
Yes, yes, and they're like one of the only teams to do that. I think it's
Brutal.
like the worst in the ACC.
It
So
is.
that is something that Miami should be able to pin their ears back and get to the quarterback. If you don't, you're just going to find a lot more ACC meddling in there, and they're going to need to do that because their running back Ott has been a little banged up this year. He's not playing
Yeah, he
as
hasn't
well
had a
as he
breakout
was
game this
expected.
season.
I don't want it to be Miami to be his
Oh,
breakout
Jesus, please no.
here.
Please no, Jesus.
I would expect them to probably try to do that because Miami has struggled a little bit in terms of setting the edge. It was exposed at Virginia Tech, yes, but it was also just kind of a summation of injuries because I noticed like once the new guys started coming in and actually started playing their assignments, Zaquan Patterson, for example, I noticed like
Right.
once the coaches, I could see the exchange on the sideline from where I am of like, you got the back, it's man coverage. I went, oh, okay. He's in the backfield every single time when that
Yeah.
happens. So I don't expect the same lapses to come through. Miami's going to be angry. I think this is where we talked about Miami being a different football team than what it has been in the past. One, they have more poise. Two, they just seem like a more cohesive unit in terms of they don't like having these types of games against Virginia Tech. They came in, the feedback from the locker room was that they were angry. They watched
Yeah.
the film. They were very, humble in terms of what their mistakes were, and they came out of it very frustrated and angry. So they're going to be focused. Cal probably wishes Miami didn't have a game like they did this
Oh, yeah,
past
no.
this past outcome. They wanted them coming in, like a breeze. So I think this is a much better game for Miami, and it's a matter of how they control the first quarter, first half. Because if they can get through the first half smooth, I think it's all downhill from there. But if
I
they
agree.
keep this game close, that's where the problem. It'll be the same problems again. Is it Cam Ward going to be trying to force the ball a little bit more? If he can actually take that extra little bit of a step, he's done it against adversity. He's done it in his preparation. That was just kind of a lapse last week because the game started to kind of get away from them a little bit for momentum. So in this case,
Yeah.
I think it's just they just have to focus.
So Cal has always gone under the point total, and UM has gone over the point total in
Yes.
every game this season for both teams. So I think if it's a low scoring game, it might be Cal might be controlling it. I think if it's a boat race and we're just like just aerial bombarding it, we're going to take this home. For me, what I'm looking out for is I'm looking how does travel impact the game. I know the media tends to blow this up, but we are the first ACC squad to go out to the West Coast, us and Virginia Tech, to see this whole bi-coastal thing. So I'm wondering how the 3-hour difference, especially that late at night, I don't think Virginia Tech's going to have as big of a problem when they play Stanford, because that's a 3:30 game. So it's going to be a little bit different than playing at 10:30 local time. Um, but Stanford didn't seem to be phased when they beat Syracuse 2 weeks ago. Granted, that was the opposite, them coming to the East Coast, so
Yep.
that probably helped them. I think a lot of eyes will be watching and waiting to see how we will respond to this. So I think it's important, like you said, to come out of the gates swinging. We need to put this thing to bed by halftime, like you said. I think we need to run the clock out for the second half and get out of Berkeley on the first flight home. That's realistically what it needs to be. Hurricanes have the highest scoring offense in college football, and Cam Ward leads the league in throwing touchdowns. Like we were mentioning earlier, Cal's poor O line couldn't stop anything, a bloody nose with anything. They've gotten six. I mean, that this poor guy is playing on his back constantly, which again makes me wonder maybe they'll get away from the passing game because I was watching Dono,
Yeah.
your friend, and he had someone on from Cal, and he was mentioning how they haven't had their outside wide receivers who are speedster the whole season, and they're kind of like a week to week thing. So they're wondering if they bring them in, and that kind of scares me because I'm like, hey, if you have two threats that you really haven't gone to, maybe you trick us with that at first and then go to the run game and give Ott that first, breakaway game of the season. That's a cause for concern for me. Another cause for concern for me is Cal's defense has 10 interceptions this year. 4 he intercepted from Auburn, thanks to their quarterback. Again, like I mentioned earlier about the FSU game, Cal should be technically undefeated. Statistically, they beat FSU, outscoring them in yards 410 to 284. First downs, they had 23 to FSU 17. So, like, again, I don't want that loss to Florida State to kind of loom too much because I really believe they're a lot better than that one loss says they are. And then I know this sounds stupid, but College Game Day's there. And we got Marshawn Lynch as the guest picker. This is a trap game to me. It's got trap game written all over it, but my gut, Everything tells me Canes will cover, or we're going to easily win by 2 TDs, and the Calgorithm will be disappointed. But we'll still remain friends because they're
Oh,
a
we
cool
love the
school.
Algorithm.
I love the Calgorithm.
They're hysterical, and the
It's
fact that yeah, I think the response that they've gotten from Miami fans was a little unexpected on their end to
yeah,
say like, "Oh, they're actually like kind of cool fans." Yeah, I mean, look, we've suffered for long enough. We've eaten a whole buffet of humble pie. I'm kind of tired of it. I want
yeah.
to be a
I'm
toxic
stuffed.
fan again. Yeah, I'm over like coming out of my ears, humble pie. So
Yeah. We have made it, another one in the books. Thank you for watching, y'all. Until next week, be good, win the weekend, and go Canes. We'll
go
see you
Canes,
next
baby.
week. Go Canes.